Yeah, so I'm Gareth Jenkins. I've been in blockchain games since about 2014. I've been doing blockchain stuff since 2013. I've been in the video game industry for most of my career. Systems architect, infrastructure person, games designer, studio lead. I've done pretty much everything in the industry. I got into blockchain mostly out of curiosity. Initially, I'm a big math nerd, so that it appealed to me back then. And I figured out a protocol for doing representative ownership on Bitcoin at the time, back in 2013. That protocol was called Bitbind, and that evolved into launching a company called Deckbound, which built blockchain games, and we've been doing it since. Been pretty quiet the last couple of years, but sort of coming back into the foreground last year or so with a current project, Lunar Mines, and also a kind of evolution of some of the technology stuff that we've done. But what I wanted to talk about today, and I've spoken about this once before in the conference in Lyon, I've kind of updated this talk for those who were there as well, but what I wanted to talk about today was how player ownership relates to issues in the video game industry, not issues that we're creating ourselves in this weird sort of blockchain games industry. And there's a couple of sort of points here that relate to both, but really I'm quite focused on making sure that we're addressing issues that are present in the video games industry. So let's go through this. So let's start off with the real basic stuff here. Players think that they own their stuff already, but people who play video games, the way that they play their games, the way they interact with the games is broadly speaking representing ownership. Even though they don't technically or legally own the things in their games, they behave like they do, and a lot of games developers and publishers treat them like they do. There are lots of bad examples as well, but for gamers who are very passionate about item-based games, they treat the things as if they own them anyway. Obviously, they don't. It's worth just pointing that out. Not only do they not own them, they don't have any of the actual control over those things that you might expect with ownership of most other consumer media and consumer items. On the flip side of that, there's something about games that this is really more of a cultural thing or a community thing that develops around games. The video games industry itself tends to treat games as games, and if you've worked in the industry, you'll know that project games or games as projects have always been treated as this very isolated, siloed thing. And even with games all being now connected in some way or being run as services or brands that will do crossover with games and other media, they're still treated as games, and it's kind of I think quite inaccurate from my point of view. Games are also data, services, culture. There's all this other stuff that surrounds games, and I think that's actually as interesting from a blockchain perspective as the games themselves. And one of the reasons why that's always interested me, right from when I started in this whole crazy blockchain space, was that the blockchain, the kind of academic description of a blockchain really maps very well to this concept of ownership, particularly around in-game digital items. Blockchain has at its core the idea that you own something that was either sold to you or given to you as a result of your work, that only has value based on some form of consensus. Either that's a consensus of other people about what that thing is, or it's that you can use that item or digital asset or whatever it is in some existing service. And I'll come on to this again later, because I think this is one way of looking at ownership of in-game items that's quite different from what we're currently doing in blockchain games. A lot of current crypto collectibles games really force the issue of saying, this is the thing, we told you this was the thing, but actually video games industry idea of ownership is often player-led, not developer-led. And just to sort of round out this whole introduction section, and just in case you're not aware of this already, and I really hope everybody is, people who play video games already care about the things that are in them. We don't have to make these things become appealing in some way. Yes, there are games that fail because they don't develop an audience or people don't like the content that's in them, but for the games that people choose to play, and particularly the games that people play over long periods of time, we don't have to convince players to like the items that are in them or to care about the things that they have. That is already the case. I think it's also why the video games industry is such a great application of blockchain technology. Okay, so let's look at a couple of examples here. So I've picked out 3 different examples of ownership in the video game space, and I'm going to use them throughout the rest of the talk to kind of just give some comparisons and ideas. So I want to play the game that I bought, the game that I own. Well, that's actually quite hard. You don't really own the games that you bought, and historically, the games that you have bought often go away and become non-playable. There are services, the screenshots from GOG.com, that have gone out of their way to try and sort of fix this. And GOG provides an excellent service, but they haven't fixed the problem. They've kind of worked around the problem in a way that's okay for most people, although there, as I'll mention later, there are some problems with it. They put a huge amount of effort into making all the titles available, and they deal with a lot of licensing issues and some tech issues as well to make those games available to players. And people are often rebuying titles that they've owned at some point in the past. Well, that's different from player ownership. This is more to do with the concept of owning a game and having it be something that's yours. The next example, hopefully a pretty obvious one, I made this so I own it. This is a hardcore character from Diablo. You would be very hard pushed to argue with someone who'd spent dozens or hundreds of hours leveling a hardcore character in Diablo to say that they didn't own that. That is quite obviously their thing. It's a product of their work. And while someone else might have created a very similar character in the same game, they would still separately describe those items as theirs. They're not interchangeable. And then finally, the other example of ownership that exists in the traditional video game space is things that you can sell, that you can trade, you can use them, you can destroy them. The example I've got up here is from Eve, because it's an excellent example for this. There are sadly fewer and fewer traditional video games that actually support full economy-based trading. Eve is obviously one of those that always has. And it's the relatively straightforward stuff here. We're talking about things that you can acquire from other players, or you can acquire them from a first party. You can sell them again. You can do things with them that represent trading. Okay, so let's look at how this relates in terms of what we're doing in the blockchain game space, and just sort of cover some terminology, because I see these things get used a lot, and I think there's a lot of crossover and a lot of confusion. First up, decentralized games. I don't think these things exist. I have yet to see an actually decentralized game. I think it's a fascinating concept, and I don't think we have anything that's even remotely like that. For me, a decentralized game is the product of decentralized design. It doesn't have any centralized commercial control. It just doesn't relate to the video games industry as far as I'm concerned, though I'm very excited to see how people might figure this out in the future. Next one, games that use blockchain tech. Well, this is the opposite end of the spectrum. If blockchain is just technology, that could apply to any existing game. There's lots of different ways in which you could apply it, whether that's for payments, for infrastructure, for ownership of items. There's lots of cool things that you can do with blockchain technology. Crypto blank, this could be anything. These are things that are based off this speculative idea of cryptocurrencies. I'm not particularly interested in this, and it's not really what I want to talk about today, but it's worth including because quite a lot of what we're doing in the blockchain game space at the moment kind of falls closer to this category than it does anything else. Some crypto collectibles arguably fall into this category as well, but it's a fine line between whether something's purely collectible, speculative, or whether it's a video game that's got a heavily collectibles model. And then finally, when the little beeper thing works, blockchain games, which is hopefully what we're all doing. These are games that are facilitated by blockchain, games that wouldn't have been possible without the blockchain. And that's what's most exciting for me. I haven't got a huge amount of time, so the example I'm going to give is the thing that I'm working on, obviously. It's Lunar Mines. It's an abstract space mining game where you mine ores in space and trade them with other players, and it's in one massive universe where there's exploration, trade, service-based economies between players, and all these other cool things. There's very little information about it online, but you can sign up. I'll put the link up at the end. But the reason I point it out is that this game would not have been possible without the blockchain. It relies on not only players being able to trade items with each other, but they can buy and sell services from each other. And that would actually not really be possible commercially or legally in the traditional space, and it technically would have been very difficult as well. So that's a blockchain game as far as I'm concerned, and there's other people here working on similar things, games that just wouldn't have been possible without the blockchain. So, just jumping back to this little matrix thing, we've got decentralized games. Okay. We'll just jump into the next section. Just as a quick refresher, decentralized games largely don't exist yet. Games that use blockchain tech could be anything. Crypto blank is really not to do with video games at all. And blockchain games. How do those four different things relate to these three categories? Well, I want to play the games that I bought that I own. This is quite an obvious application of blockchain technology, but it's not a particularly interesting or sexy problem to solve. It's also quite hard. There are people who are working on this at the moment, but the idea of being able to sell people the rights to the games that they acquire in a way that would have some long-term representation and utility is very difficult. There are people working on this outside the games industry where I think there'll be greater successes earlier on. The music industry is quite a good example for independent music publishing. Doing this for games is going to be really hard. I hope someone does pull it off. GOG isn't really sustainable. It's already struggling with service-based and connected games. It's provided a great service to date, but it isn't really the long-term solution. The next category, I made this so I own it. I don't think we actually have to do much here to facilitate this. Like, we don't have to change how video games are designed to be able to say, okay, this hardcore character you created in Diablo, it now exists on a blockchain. That's just putting that technology in place. And instead of it existing in a database in Blizzard's infrastructure, it could exist on a blockchain. Now, is that going to happen with big AAA companies right now? Probably not. They don't need to. But it might happen with newer independent titles. And based on some of the conversations I've had over the last couple of years, there are people who are actively interested in doing this, but this doesn't mean that we have to change how these games work. It's just an application of the technology into existing games and existing player behavior. And then the final one, this is really interesting. So this is such an obvious use case for blockchain. If you speak about blockchain or cryptocurrencies on a regular basis, being able to sell, trade, etc., is very, very straightforward. How do you apply that to games? Well, the example I gave Eve is a bit of an odd one. That exists in Eve almost as an anomaly. Players don't own the things that they have in Eve, but because they think they do, and because CCP have treated players with a huge amount of respect, it's ended up being this kind of game where people do actually think that they own their things, and that largely it's hard to argue with that. But you couldn't just go out and create that tomorrow. It would be very difficult for any existing developer who wasn't already CCP to go out and say, this is how this game is going to work. That happened as a consequence of both the players and the developer, and it certainly wasn't CCP's intention to make it be like that in the first place. So you couldn't go out there and just do that tomorrow as a game designer, but maybe blockchain technology would help you if you were able to put something together where you said, actually, we're doing all this on the blockchain, so all these bold statements that we're making about the things that you own and what you can do with them, actually we can back them up with technology that really kind of manifests that idea. Okay, so let's just map these to this little matrix thing. So decentralized games, things that aren't centrally controlled, don't exist as far as I'm concerned. Fascinating, but not really applicable to the video games industry. Games that use blockchain tech, well, that could be anything, that's just games. Crypto blank, not games. And blockchain games, which is hopefully what we're doing. So let's get rid of the two on the left, and then map these back with the things we were looking at earlier. So games that use blockchain tech, obviously the GOG example, the Diablo example, they're just two examples of how you could use blockchain technologies right now. There are hundreds of other examples, and because I've foolishly been doing this for quite a long time, I've ended up advising and helping various other people in the industry who are really trying to figure this out. And there is an appetite for it, but it's so radically different from what people are seeing as the blockchain games industry that I think it's going to take us some effort to convince people that we're not all lunatics and get them to actually use this stuff. And then on the bottom section, blockchain games. Well, obviously we've put Lunar Mines up there. Hunter Coins there, one of the first examples, in fact pretty much the first example, aside from what we did at Deckbound and a few other people at the same time, of something that was based directly off the blockchain. And then I've put Eve up there. Eve is not a blockchain game, but it is by far the best example we have of a blockchain game, so it gets an honorary mention. And then also, I'm going to stick that guy up there. CryptoKitties is a blockchain game, and it's quite difficult to describe this versus a pure collectibles game, but the way people interact with it is because of how it works. So the cost attendant to trading kitties and the difficulty in doing it, particularly early on, informed how people played it, and therefore the game itself is a product of it running on a blockchain. It wouldn't work like that if it wasn't running on a blockchain. So it's kind of in this weird category of something that is effectively actually a blockchain game. And there's other cool collectibles projects as well that I would put in the same category, but that's a well-known one. So that's it. That's me. Lunarmines.io. If you want to sign up for information about Lunar Mines, I will send you an email when we've got more to tell you. Delox.io is a distributed ledger that I built for hierarchical representative ownership of digital assets that don't have a speculative cryptocurrency or token attached to them. It's also the home of Bitbind. If you're familiar with my earlier work on Bitbind, that's kind of where that's ended up. And you can email me at gareth@deckbound.com or find me. I'll be around the next couple of days. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Do you have any questions for Gareth? Actually, we can have a microphone now. Actually, I've got it here, so you can use the microphone so we can record your question for posterity. So you better say who you are.
Hi, I'm Rick Moore from the Secret Police. My question is, how do you know players actually care about this stuff?
Okay, I've got a really good answer to that. In 2015, I raised a bunch of money for Deckbound and started a game studio. Originally, we were going to be a tech company. We were just going to do all the back-end tech to facilitate games running on the blockchain. But because it was quite hard at the time to convince people of how this would work, and because I'd spent most of my career running game studios, I thought, okay, let's build some games internally within Deckbound. And we then spent about 3 years going around to every major consumer video games event exhibiting blockchain games. I think we did 32 different events across the UK, US, and in Asia, and ran booths as you typically do when you're promoting games. And we spoke to people about blockchain games. I've spoken to tens of thousands of consumers about blockchain games, and in my opinion, there are enough of them that care about what we're doing that we can convince them that we can actually do something valuable. A lot of the time, though, their interest in it doesn't come from, oh, how can I make money out of playing this game? How could my interest in these items be manifest better in terms of ownership? It's not that. It's just that when you identify something that they like and that they engage with already as a player, and then say, actually, we're also doing this, or this is how we're facilitating it, it's like, oh, that's great. I've always wanted to be able to do that. I've always wanted to be able to trade independently, or I've always wanted to be able to back up my content elsewhere. We've got to figure out what the benefits are to people having blockchain in their games, not have this kind of odd, like, well, it's a blockchain game, so therefore it's better, which is kind of where we're at the moment, I think.
But I mean, do players care that they can keep their virtual goods? So, yes, like if the game goes offline because you're not making money, and they've bought some car in it or something, what's the point, you know?
Well, you could make that argument for every video game or consumer service.
Like exactly, that's the thing. Like, you could have done this in a centralized way decades ago, right? But developers haven't. Right. Okay. So no one wants it.
So that's solely focusing on the idea of ownership being something where you don't trust the person that you're buying from in the first place. And I don't think people buy things from people that they don't trust. The idea of ownership of items in video games allows extensibility for players. It allows them to do things with the things that they own that they wouldn't have been able to do previously. And I think that's where people care about it. It's not about a trust element in, will this service go away? I don't think they're going to buy the thing in the first place if they thought that it would. It's what can I do with it because I do now own it. Trading is a really obvious example. Trading of digital items in the video games industry is incredibly hard to do, particularly if those things have cash value of any form. It's just a legal nightmare to do it. Having those things exist on a blockchain solves that problem for people.
But doesn't that also create a problem for developers? Because if you can sell a virtual good to someone else, you've created a second-hand market.
Yeah, you just got to design your games with that in mind. Yeah. And there's plenty of game types where you can do it. TCGs are a great example. It works particularly well there. There's a secondary market for all physical TCGs already. It's, that example has been proven out. It's not suitable for every game, but it's definitely suitable for some.
But you could do it without blockchain, though, if they wanted to.
You can't do it. You can't facilitate a secondary market for digital items with a centrally stored database of assets. It's just legally not possible to do it.
Legally not possible?
It's simply not. The way that you receive money in as someone who, if you sell a digital item in a game and you want to create a secondary market for people to be able to trade that independently, you will immediately get stuck by the fact that there was some cash value there for the items that you sold. There's a money transfer risk. It's impossible. That's why Valve with Artifact, their internal player trading works on a virtualized currency that can only be spent inside of their store. That's the best solution that Valve could come up with, and Valve are one of the biggest games publisher developers out there. You know, they know their stuff. They've got the experience of doing this. You can't actually have there be cash value for these things that players have, and the blockchain allows you to do that. There's other problems for sure in terms of figuring it out, but the blockchain does allow you to do those types of things.
Okay. Patrick, just wait for the microphone. You can say who you are, because we're recording it, so we need to.
Hey, Patrick from Deckbound. Answer to your question: if people want that, users are interested in tradable digital goods, data that we have collected throughout the first 8 months last year was showing that if you have an average RPPU, so average return per paying user on mobile games, which is, I think it's somewhere around $50. The RPPU that we have seen on blockchain games is 10 times higher. So the average player in the first half, well, a bit more than the first half of 2018, was spending about $500.
But they're trading, and they're buying